Introduction. Historical praise of Saint Odon by the author Mabillon, as found in Acts of the Saints of the Order of Saint Benedict, Century 5, page 124.
Chapter 1. The authors of his life, his parents, and homeland. Although two authors, John and Nalgatus, both Cluniac monks, wrote about the deeds of Saint Odo, they left out many significant details that should be recorded. To avoid neglecting the examination of a man who was greatly esteemed within the Benedictine community, it's important to present a historical account before the works of these two writers, addressing the matters they left untouched or insufficiently explained. Let's start with these two authors. The first, John, mentioned his own fortune sporadically across 3 books about Odo, which a summary manuscript condenses into 2. He was Italian by birth, Roman by homeland, and a canon by profession. When Odo traveled to Rome in 939, John brought him to Pavia, where he was made a monk, as noted in Book 1, Numbers 2 and 4. John later took him as a companion on a pilgrimage and appointed him as prior, as noted multiple times in Book 2, specifically Numbers 4, 7, and 10, whether at Cluny or in Rome at St. Paul's. This could be clarified by comparing Numbers 10 and 21. Finally, John states that he was sent to Naples due to the needs of his monastery, as noted in Number 21. John counts 2 years in Book 3, Number 5, as the entire time he was Odo's companion. During this period, whatever he observed about what Odo said or did, he later wrote down, omitting other details he learned about Odo from his master Arnulf, Bishop Hubert of Tivoli, the monk Landric, and his superior Hildebrand. He trusted only his own observations and Odo's account, which might have been lessened had he been more trusting of others' accounts. We will try to fill in these gaps as best as we can. Additionally, John dedicates his work to the monks of Salerno, whether of the monastery of St. Peter of Salerno near Fistula, which Eugelus proves was founded by Bishop Peter before 958, in Volume 7 of Italia Sacra, column 503. Sometimes, John veers off on tangents and doesn't keep the timeline of events in order. To address these issues, the monk Nalgatus set out to condense and organize John's work, as he also did with the life of St. Maelus. Peter of Revo refers to Nalgatus as a disciple of Odo in the Cluniac Chronicle, noting that he clearly described the life and miracles of Saint Odo after his passing. Godefridus Hanskenius interprets this as a reference to the life of Saint Maelus, believing Nalgatus was his disciple. However, Nalgatus lived nearly 200 years after Odo and slightly less after Maelus, as he clearly mentions during the time of Pope Urban II or shortly thereafter. We've decided to include the writings of this author in 3 smaller booklets by John, because of some details about Odo's death and burial, and other circumstances not found in John's work. Many other authors have praised Odo, and Chesnius provides a list of them in the notes to the Cluniac library. Among these, Peter of Equilinus extensively discusses Saint Odo in Book 10, Chapter 8. Before I begin discussing Odo of Cluny, it's important to mention that there were 2 other notable abbots with the same name during that period, one from Machiac and the other from St. Maxentius in Poitou. Regarding the Machiac monastery and bicherages, we should recall what we mentioned earlier in the eulogy of Abbot Berno. After Berno, Odo of Cluny appointed an abbot with the same name, who is noted to have become abbot in 935 in the Machiac Chronicle found in Volume 2 of the New Library by Labbé. It also records the death of this second Odo. In the year 967, on June 6, this well-remembered Abbot Odo passed away, and monk Arduicus on September 5. The following day is marked in the Thuano-Colbertine calendar of saints with these words, June 7, Odo of Machiac. Another Odo was an abbot at St. Maxentius in the year 963, and was succeeded by Abbot Ramnulfus in 968, as noted by the Malleocensian chronicler in the same Labius. With this context, let's turn to Odo, or Odo, the abbot of Cluny, and explore his origins and family background. His father was Abo, a man of military rank, as confirmed by John the monk and others, though they do not mention Odo's mother's name. John's account of Abo appears at the start of Book 1. According to Nalgatus, both parents were convinced by their son's guidance to embrace monastic life, drawing from John, who, after describing the miracle of crumbs turning into pearls, adds this in Book 1, Number 35. From that time, he began to be troubled within himself because of his parents' salvation, so that he might be able to free them from the bonds of this world. Not long after, he received permission to visit his father, bring him to the monastery, and make him a monk. He also had his mother take the holy veil. If her life had been documented, which I wish it had, it would appear more like history than a mere note. Thus, Odo was born to such parents in the year 879, given that in 939 he was 60 years old, according to John at the beginning of Book 1, Number 4. It's inferred that his birthplace was the city of Tours, due to his father's devotion to Saint Martin, to whom he dedicated himself from a young age, as noted by John in number 9. This assumption is supported by the same author's mention in Book 2, number 16, of young Odo's nephew being captured by the Normans when they ravaged the lands of Tours. Therefore, his nephew was in Tours. However, in the Old Cluny Charter Book, there is an account of Odo, where the author claims he originated from the region of Maine. This account was written during the time of Abbot Odilo by someone responsible for organizing the records of the previous abbots. Here's a summary of the praise. According to the truthful accounts from those before us, he was born into a noble family from the region of Maine. He was well educated in the liberal arts, served as a caretaker of the Basilica of Saint Martin of Tours, and was eloquent, among other qualities. Inspired by the virtues that the reputation of Cluny or rather Baum had spread far and wide like precious spices, he left his countryside with a willing heart for what he had long desired. While his fellow citizens mourned, Christ rejoiced in glory, and he humbly submitted to the divine yoke. After diligently completing the trial of his conversion, urged by the prayer of his father whose teachings he had both willingly and, more truthfully, unwillingly followed, he took on the leadership of the entire fraternity. With sharp insight, he subdued proud minds, and with caution, worked to instill virtues. Italy knows, Burgundy attests, and France also reports. He was undoubtedly recognized as possessing the gift of prophecy. When faced with his final days and asked by the brothers who should lead them, he reportedly answered, inspired by a great insight, "In our uncertain judgment, O sons, Christ the Lord's ample wisdom will not fail, providing a holy shepherd for his house and granting you, his praying servants, a worthy father." This is clearer than the sun to those who consider it wisely, as the life and conversion of Lord Haymard provide ample proof. A brief speech on the praiseworthy nobility of such a man should suffice, showing how greatly we ought to adhere to the teachings of one who, by merit, is undoubtedly included among the ranks of angels. This much was included by the old author, who wrote this praise during the time of Abbot Odilo, that is, 100 years after the death of Odo, in the records stored under Odo in the Cluny archives. Chapter 2. Odo's Childhood and Adolescence, Canonical Life, Studies. Odo was partly raised by Fulk, the second of that name, Count of Anjou, whom he refers to as his foster brother in a letter, and partly in the household of William, Duke of Aquitaine, as John records at the start of the first book. This William, known as the Pious, ruled Aquitaine and Gascony by his own right at that time. We've mentioned that he laid the foundations of the Cluny Monastery and Brno's tribute. In fact, Odo's father, Abbot, held great influence with William, as John notes in section 5. After Odo was weaned, Abbot entrusted him to a priest living in a more remote area, to be raised and educated in literature, as noted in section 7. Around this time, while involved in military activities at William's court, Odo felt called to a holier service by Christ the Lord on Christmas Day during his 16th year, after suffering from a headache for 2 years at his father's house. Later, fulfilling his father's vow, Odo dedicated himself to Saint Martin at the age of 19, around the year 899 AD, becoming a cleric and canon in the presence of many citizens and nobles. Among them was Count Fulk, who had raised him, and who soon provided him with a cell next to St. Martin's Church, along with daily sustenance from the same canonry. Fulk, known as Good, is praised in the deeds of the Counts of Anjou in the 10th volume of the Elogium, pages 402 and 434, where it states on page 435, "His good manners, both at home and in the military, were cultivated. He had a good sense of justice, great harmony, and very little greed." About Odo, he nurtured Saint Odo, gave him a cell next to the Church of Saint Martin, and provided daily sustenance from the same chamber. Later, with the consul's support, Odo was appointed master of the school and precentor of the same church. John then from number. The text outlines Odo's studies and virtues, detailing his journey to Paris where he learned the liberal arts from Remigius, a monk from Auxerre. This included Augustine's dialectic sent to his son Adiodatus. Upon returning to Tours, Odo condensed Gregory the Great's moral teachings on Job. This work was published in Paris in 1617, thanks to Dom Martin Marr, a monk at St. Martin of the Fields. John notes that Odo undertook this work at the request of his fellow canons, despite initial reluctance. Although Odo doesn't mention this in his dual preface, written in both prose and verse, possibly out of modesty, he implies that he took on the task almost independently with these words, "While I devoted myself to sacred reading within my humble capacity, a book by Blessed Gregory about the history of the most holy Job caught my attention one day." This remarkable teacher, inspired by divine insight and nourished by heavenly wisdom, spread his eloquent discourse over the history of this man. so extensively that he created 35 books, eventually condensing them into 6 volumes. As I read through the first part, filled with intense love and a certain sweetness, my mind was captivated, desiring to absorb the entire book if possible. This extraordinary teacher, enriched by divine inspiration, sought to clearly express the interpretations of the Fathers that came to him during his explanations. He condensed numerous volumes into the history, as those familiar with the Holy Scripture know, extracted by the holy man named Paterius and compiled into his own clear volumes. 2 years ago, I compiled all the interpretations of the Fathers in the Book of Kings, especially those of the Most Holy Pope Gregory, into a booklet that I believe is worthy of consideration. Recognizing my own frailty and physical weakness, and for the benefit of those like me, I stood against myself, not inflated with pride or arrogance, nor relying on empty flattery, God knows this, motivated by the passion for reading the mentioned history, which I memorized with all my effort to retain its understanding. I compiled this small book. Thus far, Odo in the preface of his compendium. In section 21, John addresses Count Fulk, claiming he suffered a deadly illness after taking 2 golden vessels from the Church of St. Martin's treasury, and was healed through Odo's prayers. Some recent scholars disagree, pointing to Fulk's piety, which earned him the nickname the Good. Yet, even the sun casts shadows, and the author of the book on the deeds of the Counts of Anjou, who recounts many illustrious things about Fulk, included this event, which I believe was to reinforce John's own authority. Returning to the canonical life of Odo, it's helpful to briefly explain the discipline among the Martinian community at that time. After renouncing monastic life, a certain regular form of discipline flourished there. The number of monks decreased from 300 to 150 canons. Continuous psalmody was limited to specific hours, as explained more fully in the Eulogy of Alcuin, section 46. Nonetheless, the cloister maintained its reverence, women were forbidden entry, and many measures were in place to maintain propriety. The situation worsened after the second burning of that basilica, about which Odo, now a monk, gave a sermon at the request of the canons. After the previous burning, he said, with great effort they rebuilt the monastery walls, wanting to protect the holy house from being harmed by enemies again. You have not paid enough attention to how greatly this holy place has been revered since ancient times. You've immediately abandoned its sacredness, allowing it to become a common inn. Guards do not stop women from fetching water and wandering wherever they want. We have seen that no one was allowed to enter the monastery gates, not even a little. This is addressed in the letter of Pope Leo VII to Duke Hugh and the Abbot, published in the 2nd volume of the Spice Elogium. It decrees that throughout the entire extent of the old wall up to the road running alongside the northern side of the basilica, no woman is permitted to reside, nor even to enter, except for the sole purpose of prayer. Odo adds, it is also quite displeasing that some nurtured in the same place disgrace themselves with certain lay or excessively ostentatious garments, when their behavior has been such that we have heard it praised even in Rome. Indeed, Odo had reminded the canons to conduct themselves better both through words and example, as mentioned by John in Book 1, number 17. Chapter 3. The beginning of monastic life, companions, priesthood. While Odo spent his time in retreat at the Basilica of St. Martin, reading and reflecting on the Fathers, he discovered the rule of St. Benedict. Following its guidance, he lived for 3 years without possessions. Although he wasn't yet a monk, he embraced the monk's light yoke. As John testifies, he invited Count Fulco to join him. But when Fulco said it wasn't the right time, he introduced Odo to a soldier named Adhigranus, skilled in arms, and brought them together. Both, content with a very small hut, longed daily for monastic vows. However, they couldn't find a place where such discipline thrived. Adhigranus was sent to Rome to explore, but during his journey, he detoured to Balma. Impressed by the abbot's kindness and the monk's devotion, he brought Odo with him, who moved to this monastery with 100 volumes of books. He was about 30 years old when the year of Christ was nearly 909. This is noted by John. Regarding Balma, as mentioned in Berno's praise, after completing his probation, Odo took on the care and education of the boys or novices, which John refers to as a school, as was often done by the ancients. Adhigranus, Odo's companion, confined himself to one small cell, and with Abbot Berno's permission, he stayed there for 3 years. Later, he sought solitude and was confined in a small cave. There, after much suffering, he was deemed worthy of divine consolation and was freed from demonic temptations with the help of St. Martin, even being comforted by his conversation, as John notes. John continues to write about him, stating that more than 30 years have passed, if he is not mistaken, since Adhigranus has lived in that solitude. He usually descends to the monastery of St. Peter, known as Cluny, which is nearly 2 miles away, only on Sundays or major feast days. He takes a small amount of flour, from which he makes bread, and a few grains of beans, then quickly returns to solitude. He never drinks wine, and his food is never seasoned with fat or oil. He endures both cold and heat at all times, warmth between his shoulders and chill between his hands and arms. It's quite remarkable about Adhigrinus, whom Chesnius notes was listed among the saints. I'm not denying his merit, I'm looking for the authority, for I find no mention of Adhigrinus in the martyrologies or breviaries, nor any memory of his feast or relics among our cluniacenses. I'm not sure if the same Droco, a very pious monk of Fleury, was his companion in the desert. He, proven in monastic life, took on a unique struggle in the desert at a place called Balma, as Aemwinus testifies in the previous volume, page 361. The Malleocense Chronicle mentions Tuthalon as a companion of Adhigrinus. At the same time, while Turpio was still alive, Odo and Tuthalon, canons of the illustrious Saint Martin, left all their possessions to follow Christ, the Poor One, and took on the holy habit and life at Cluny. By God's will, Odo became the most holy abbot, as we will discuss later. Tuthalon, under his abbot's command, was unwillingly consecrated as the Archbishop of Tours, etc. However, from the above, it's clear that this is false about Tuthalon or Teotalon, and this will become more apparent from what follows. After some time, Brno considered Odo worthy of the priesthood and promoted him. With the bishop summoned, he made him a priest without his consent. John explains this in number 37, though the bishop is not named. Nalgatus suggests the Archbishop of Besançon, but this is incorrect. It's clear from John's passage that Odo, at the request of his ordaining bishop and the command of the abbot, wrote 3 booklets about priests from the prophecy of Jeremiah, that is, 3 books of conferences, which were dedicated to Bishop Turpio of Limoges. Therefore, this bishop conferred the priesthood on Odo shortly before his abbatial dignity. Chapter 4. The dignity of the abbot and the state of the monastic order. During that period, Father Brno became gravely ill. He soon called upon the neighboring bishops and renounced all his duties. Meanwhile, he asked the brothers to choose someone they wanted as their leader. At that moment, the brothers expressed that John, our father, was almost forcibly convinced to take the position. With everyone insisting that he should be ordained, he was brought before his abbot against his will. Eventually, pressured by the bishop's insistence, he was ordained as abbot shortly before Brno's passing. This event, which occurred at the start of the year 927, is recorded in the Chronicle of Malleocense. However, the reasons we've presented suggest otherwise, supported by the Lemavicence martyrology noted by Chesnius in the notes to the Cluniac library. Odo was entrusted with 3 monasteries, Cluny, Machiac, and Dole. To Wido, a relative of Brno, 4 were entrusted, Gigny, Baum, Ethic, and the cell of St. Lauten, as explained in detail in the tribute to Brno himself. Odo the abbot achieved many great and remarkable feats. The perfection of the Cluny monastery and its dedication, privileges, rituals, and strict discipline set the standard for other monasteries either built or joined, forming the Cluniac Congregation. His journeys to Rome for the good of the Church, fostering harmony among rulers, charity toward the poor, and other extraordinary deeds made Odo's fame celebrated everywhere. These matters are discussed by John in Book 3 and Nalgatus. From these accounts, it is sufficient to highlight a few key aspects: the rights and dignity of the Cluny monastery, the reform or establishment of other monasteries, and the journeys to Rome. I will first address these here, but before that, we must discuss the state of the monastic order in Gaul during that time. Following the great leaders, Charles the Great and Louis the Pious, who earnestly discussed enhancing the order of Saint Benedict, Benedict of Agnan managed to unite most monasteries in Gaul under a single religious community. It seemed promising that this discipline would endure for a long time. However, after Benedict, the founder and protector of this order, passed away, the chaos of civil and foreign wars devastated the entire kingdom and this noble effort. Amid intense conflicts among Louis the Pious's sons, and even with Louis himself, the Normans suddenly invaded Gaul from the north. They severely weakened the state, already suffering from internal wars, over 60 years. During this period, villages turned into wilderness, cities were attacked and burned, churches were plundered, monasteries were destroyed, and monks were either killed or forced to flee. Gathering the relics of saints and their belongings, they hurried away from the path of war to safer places, if any could be found, or were barely able to live a miserable life wandering. In some areas, where they could catch their breath for a while, they repaired huts as best they could, focusing more on survival and safety than following the rules. In certain places where the monastic population dwindled, a few clerics gathered and took possession of the former holdings of the monks, and even when peace returned, they kept them for themselves. As a result, by the beginning of the 10th century, when Odo began contemplating monastic life, few monasteries remained, and sincere religion was lacking in those few, as noted in Book 1, number 22 of John and in our preface. Amid all this turmoil, particularly under Abbot Odo, Cluny rose above all other monasteries with a reputation for religious devotion, which Odo established there after Bernin. In that place, there was a strong spirit of competition in virtues, a dedication to sacred matters, precise observance of rules, and charity toward the poor. So much so that 17,000 poor people received alms at Cluny at the beginning of Lent one year, including 250 hams, as recorded by Ulrich in Book 3 of the Customs of Cluny, Chapter 11. This house also supported the Apostolic See more than once, serving as a common treasury of the Church. Peter the Venerable is the author. Many of the rites were taken from Abbot Eutychius, with additions by Berno, Odo, and others. Eutychius seems to be none other than Benedict of Agnan, who gathered the institutions of the old monks and proposed them as models. Some of these rites are mentioned by John in Book 1, number 23, especially number 30 and the following. Some related to the divine office, some to regular discipline and monastic virtues, while others concern the education of the young and instruction of others. All of these are accurately described by the holy monk Ulrich, following Bernard, a monk from the same place, in 3 books, which were published by our Acrius in Volume 4 of the Elogium. The first book deals with psalmody, solemn masses, and various important celebrations, the second with regular discipline, the third with the officials. It was customary to celebrate 2 solemn masses daily. Private sacred rites were performed only outside the divine office and major mass. Each person offered their own sacrifices from one of the 2 choirs daily. However, they communicated with 3 free days only on 5 Sundays. The others took blessed hosts like eulogies before the common meal. In solemn masses for the deceased and during the rogation days triduum, both choirs would make an offering. In major sacred rites, the deacon always communicated from the priest's host, the subdeacon only from other hosts. Communion was provided to everyone in the triduum before Easter. Whoever wanted to celebrate privately on Holy Saturday before the major Mass did not use a candle, as the new fire had not yet been consecrated. In these matters, nothing is more noteworthy than what's detailed about making the hosts in Book 3, Chapter 13. The monks selected the wheat grain by grain and washed it carefully themselves. It was then placed in a special bag and taken to the mill by a trusted servant, who washed the millstones, covered them with curtains, and dressed in white, covering his face except for his eyes. The flour was sifted with the same meticulous care, using a thoroughly cleaned sieve. Then, the chief custodian of the church, if a priest or deacon, completed the rest of the tasks with help from 2 others of the same order and a lay brother. If not a priest or deacon, he appointed a substitute. These 4, after their morning prayers, washed their faces and hands. 3 of them dressed in white garments. 1 sprinkled the flour with pure water, while the other 2 baked the hosts in an engraved iron. This demonstrates the devotion and reverence the Cluniac monks had for the Eucharist. In their regular duties, the discipline was equally stringent. Silence was maintained throughout the day, and at night it was so sacred that breaking it before prime was considered unthinkable, even preferring death. Communication was done through signs, which Guigo, the 5th prior of the Carthusian order, did not fully approve of, despite his dedication to silence. He believed that only the tongue should be used, not involving other limbs in the act of speaking, as stated in Chapter 31 of the Statutes. From the Ides of November, the older members meditated in the church after nocturnes, while the younger ones practiced singing in the chapter house. Manual work was accompanied by psalms, and confessing faults was customary. After Compline, guests were not admitted, nor were the brothers allowed to eat. Udaloricus tells of a notable instance where the cellarer, busy receiving wine all day, wasn't granted permission by the abbot to eat after Compline. The same strictness applied to divine offices. If someone was about to leave or ride a horse and the office bell rang, they were required to attend immediately. The rule about fasting generally followed the instructions of Saint Benedict. From September 13th, there was typically just 1 meal per day, except on feast days with 12 readings. During the octaves of Christmas and Epiphany, they had 2 meals. On feast days with 12 readings, after lunch and a reading in the cloister, they would have a drink in the dining hall after nuns. On regular days, after Vespers, there was a reading, followed by a drink in the dining hall, another reading, and then a spiritual discussion. Leftover bread and wine were given by the almoner to poor travelers on foot. Additionally, 18 poor people were fed daily at Cluny. Wine was used so sparingly that 8 cartloads sufficed for more than 30 brothers annually at the Charity Monastery, as noted by Eudolarchus in Book 3, Chapter 1. According to Saint Odo's rules, the fast of the 4 seasons in September was observed in the week when the feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross fell on a Wednesday, Friday, or Saturday. Thus, the cross was venerated by those fasting. Whether Odo allowed the use of medicine for the brothers is uncertain. According to Book 2, number 14 of John, and also from Book 6, letter 39 of Peter the Venerable. The Carthusians, as Guigo mentions in chapter 39, rarely used medicine, except for cautery and bloodletting. Bloodletting occurred 5 times a year. Over time, the Cluniacs designated a specific day each month for bloodletting. This process is detailed by Eudolaricus in Book 2, chapter 21. I'll skip the minor details. More importantly, Eudolaricus wrote about the education of boys. Indeed, it is difficult to imagine any king's son being raised with greater care in a palace than any smallest boy in Cluny. These words are from Book 3, chapter 8. The management of this discipline was overseen by an abbot through a senior prior, deans, a cloister prior, inspectors, teachers of boys, a precentor, and a librarian. The librarian was in charge of the books, especially those for the choir, in the library. A chamberlain managed the clothing, a treasurer took care of the church's treasures, and the roles of cellarer, stablemaster, almoner, and infirmary master were also part of the management team. The privilege of freedom granted to Cluny at the request of its founder William, and later affirmed by the abbots and Roman popes, is central to the discipline of the place. Pope Callistus II, in his letters to Abbot Pontius, stated that this privilege was given to Cluny from its very foundation. He listed the popes who confirmed it: John XI, John XII, Agapitius II, Leo IX, Gregory VI and VII, Alexander II, Stephen X, Victor III, Urban II, Pascal II, and Gelasius II. Peter the Venerable addressed those who claimed that the Cluniacs lacked their own bishop by saying they regarded the Roman Pope as their bishop. "We boast," he said, "to have this one and only greatest bishop. This was established by the unbreakable authority of the Holy See itself, not by the decree of just one, but many, which are preserved in our mother church." This arrangement was not made to take the Cluniac church from another bishop who previously had it, but at the request of the founders who built it on their own land. They kept it as their own and decided it should belong only to the Roman Pope forever, confirming this with many privileges. This is not unique to Cluniacs, it has been granted to many others. Long before Cluny was established, many other monasteries received this privilege from the same apostolic see. Thus wrote Abbot Peter in Book 1, letter 28. Most of these types of privileges can be found in the Cluny Bullary, with 7 granted to Abbot Odo, 1 by John X, 2 by John XI, 1 by Leo VI, and 3 by Leo VII. The privilege attributed to John X, but mistakenly credited to the 11th, is mentioned in the Praise of Brno. In the first document of John XI, among other things, the right to mint coins granted by Rudolph, king of the Franks, to Cluny is confirmed, and it states, "And because, as it is well known, almost all monasteries are straying from their purpose, we grant that if any monk from any monastery wishes to join your community solely to improve his life, and his abbot fails to provide the regular support to relinquish possessions, you may receive him until the behavior of his monastery is corrected." This was written in the month of March, in the 4th indiction, that is, the year 931. We will revisit the privilege of Cluny's liberty in the life of Saint Odilo, abbot. However, I must mention what Gregory VII decreed about Cluny at the Roman Synod, expressed in these words: "Let our priests, or rather this Holy Synod, know that although there are many monasteries founded usefully and religiously in honor of Almighty God and the Blessed Virgin, among them, Cluny stands out, known for its special allegiance to St. Peter and this church. Therefore, it has rightfully earned the honor and protection of this holy and apostolic see from the very beginning. And with divine mercy favoring, it has reached such a level of dignity and devotion under religious and holy abbots, that it surpasses other monasteries, even those much older, as far as I know, in the service of God and spiritual fervor, and none in that region, as far as I know, can match it. No abbot has ever been there who was not holy." A truly remarkable praise from the pontiff. From this point on, the Cluny monastery became renowned worldwide for its religious devotion, discipline, strictness, the number of monks, and all aspects of monastic order, as Peter the Venerable notes in Book 1 of De Miraculis, chapter 9. It became a unique refuge for sinners, through which many souls were saved from hell, finding a place in the heavenly kingdom. There, countless people, shedding the burdens of the world, embraced the gentle yoke of Christ. People from all walks of life, professions, and ranks exchanged worldly pride and luxury for the humble and simple life of monks. Even venerable church leaders, seeking respite from ecclesiastical duties, chose to live more peacefully and quietly. preferring to follow rather than lead. From here, as spiritual virtues spread, the world was filled with their fragrance, rekindling the fervor of monastic life, which had nearly waned, through the example and zeal of these men. France, Germany, and even Britain bear witness to this revival. Spain, Italy, and all of Europe acknowledge it, filled with monasteries either newly established by them or restored from ancient decay. But why mention only a few parts of the world when this fame has spread from the far west to the east and hasn't remained hidden in any corner of the Christian world? Up to this point, Peter the Venerable speaks, and the truth of his words would be easy to prove if we weren't called to another task. However, to ensure we don't entirely abandon this topic, which greatly praises the Cluniac Order and its founder Odo, we must discuss the monasteries established or restored by him and also give due attention to the other abbots of Cluny in their own right. Chapter 5, Monasteries Reformed by Odo, Establishment of the Cluniac Congregation. It's important to mention what John writes about Odo in Book 2, number 23. During that time, the name of our father began to shine far and wide like a very bright star. He became known to kings, was very close to bishops, and dear to the nobility. The monasteries built in their territories entrusted themselves to our father's authority so that he could correct and organize them according to our customs. It would be difficult to list all these monasteries in detail, but it's enough to highlight the most prominent ones. In France, we find the Adolescence and Tutelence near Limoges, the Sarlatens in the region of Périgord, the Dolents and Machiasens in the region of Bourges, the Floriasens in the region of Orleans, St. Peter's in Saint-Jonas, St. Julian's in Tours, the Romanense Abbey in the region of Vienne, and the Corillosens in the region of Macon, among others. In Italy, we read about St. Augustine's in Pavia, St. Paul's in Rome, Adventin, Subpentonian, and Salernitan. Some observations about these are necessary. Gerald, the most pious Count of Aurillac, after dedicating himself entirely to divine worship, decided to consecrate his own to the Lord as well. He traveled to Rome and solemnly bequeathed his notable estate in Aurillac to the Blessed Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, with a testament that included appendices to provide for the monks he intended to gather there. He also dedicated a tribute to be given annually to the urn of Blessed Peter, namely 10 solidi, as noted by Odo in Book 2 of his life, chapters 4 and 17. Odo adds in chapter. Gerald was eager to find suitable monks to live in the monastery. When he couldn't find any, he sent some noble boys to the monastery of Vabra, where the passion for regular observance was growing, to be trained under its rules. However, when they came back, without proper teachers, they quickly fell into youthful complacency and neglected the discipline. Out of necessity, someone was appointed to guide them, but his more relaxed habits caused Gerald great sorrow. I'm not certain if this was Adalgerus, who the Aureliacense Chronicle suggests was the first abbot of Aurillac, as noted in the second volume of the Analecta. This abbot was succeeded by Ioannis, who was from Gerald's own family. Odo, the respected third abbot of Aurillac and Cluny, wrote the life of the blessed Gerald at the request of Turpian, bishop of Limoges, and Aimone, abbot of Toul. He had Arnulf as a co-abbot. Odo was called from the Aurillac monastery, according to Amwanus in Book 1 of the Miracles of Saint Benedict, chapter 4, to restore discipline in the Floriac monastery, at the request of Count Elisard, who later became a monk. During the reign of Louis the Transmarine, Bernard, Count of Périgord, handed over the monastery of Saint Saviour of Sarlat, which eventually became an episcopal see, to Lord Odo, abbot of Cluny, and his co-abbot Adasius. Letters regarding this matter are found in the 4th volume of Gallia Christiana, though with some inaccuracies. Both Odo, the abbot of Cluny, and Adasius, his deputy, managed the monastery of Toul, now an episcopal see, after the aforementioned Aimone, who was brought from the monastery of Saint Savinus in Poitiers to Toul by Count Iballo. There is a diploma of this matter granted by King Rodolphe in the edition of V.C. Stephanus Belusius of Toul to Book 8 of Concordia, chapter 25. Back then, it was customary that because one abbot at Cluny wasn't enough for several monasteries, prohabits or coabbots were appointed in his place, who were later simply called priors. This is evident from Clarius in the Chronicle of St. Peter of Vives in Sens, where St. Odo succeeded Abbot Samson. St. Odo summoned Archbishop William and, with the monks of St. Peter's consent, appointed Arigod as the abbot of the same monastery. Arigod was a devout man who feared God and was a monk of St. Benedict above the Loire. I believe Odo did the same in the monastery of St. Julian in Tours, which was built during Bishop Gregory's time but later destroyed by the Normans. When Archbishop Theotalo restored it with help from his sister Gersande, he dedicated the church in honor of the Mother of God and St. Julian. Wanting to appoint an abbot for the gathered brothers, he called upon Abbot Odo, who was then residing at St. Benedict. The Martyrology of St. Julian reports that this occurred in the year 943, during the 8th year of King Louis's reign. However, that time refers to the donation made by Theodolo and Gersond, not to Odo's appointment at St. Julian, as he is known to have died the previous year, 942. He was buried in St. Julian's church alongside Theodolo, as we will discuss later. I read a fragment of the chronicle from that place, written 500 years ago, which was divided into 2 booklets. The first detailed the initial establishment of the abbey, its destruction, and its pious restoration. The second covered the state of the abbey from the Restoration onwards. From the tattered pages of the first booklet, we learn that many saintly bodies were originally buried in St. Julian's church, deeply buried during the time of the Danes. Some of these remained, including those of St. Bleveleguatus, Bishop of Vannes, Abbot Lowry, and Monk Anthony. The author notes that Bishop Morvanius, the 7th Bishop of Vannes after Bleveleguatus, recounted some miracles to him, which he commemorates. Bishop Blinlivet, not St. Albert of Mount Relaxed, appointed him as the 33rd Bishop of Venetia, while Morvenam became the 49th. The fragment's author notes that Larus, who was born in Britain, left his homeland and parents. However, he found Judicael, the best leader of the Britons, who helped him in every way. With Judicael's assistance, the monastery thrived in holiness and greatly benefited many people through both words and actions. Larus' noble life was highly religious in the eyes of the people and precious to the Lord. The glory of his miracles continues to bring high praises for his holiness. Through his holiness, both during his life and after his death, weaknesses are restored and illnesses are healed, especially at the place where he passed away. There, his ashes continue to live through the signs that occur. Perhaps it is the monastery of St. John of Gale, which Judicael restored. Since the book of his life educates us about his life, it is enough to highlight the essence of it. We believe this book has been lost, and as far as I know, nothing about St. Larus is read by Albert. Finally, the chronographer writes that Anthony lived among the Turones. It is said, he mentions, that St. Anthony lived there, although it is unclear whether he was originally from there or came from elsewhere. He was captivated by the sweetness of a solitary life and chose it over worldly life. He lived in a beautiful and quiet place, surrounded by a forest. There, a chapel was sculpted in stone, which now contains 2 altars. In this place, the servant of God devotedly served God. No woman approaches the spring in the chapel. This priory is visited and is located 3 leagues from Caesaradunum of the Turones toward the Cenomani. St. Anthony is celebrated on May 4th in the Gallican Martyrology. Some more recent accounts suggest he was one of the companions of St. Maurice the Abbot. An instrument from John, the Archbishop of the Turones, created in 1407, mentions the Abbot of St. Julian, discussing the relics of St. Anthony and St. Larus. We are allowed to remain unaware of what the ancients did not know. Now, let's delve into the monastery of St. Julian once more. Among the monasteries that Odo brought under his administration is Romanence, located in the Waldensian county of the Lausanne region. King Rudolph I of Burgundy granted this to his sister, Elatus. The letters, dated June 10 in the first year of the pious King Rudolph, from the incarnation of the Lord 888, in the 11th indiction, were issued at Vabra Villa. We have the complete original of these letters, which were published in the notes to the Cluniac library, though there was an error in the century number, reading 900 instead of 800. Later, Elatus, also known as Adeles, the countess herself, transferred that Roman named abbey to Odo with an excellent diploma. It's useful to refer to this for historical clarity. To all who truly consider, it is clear, etc. Therefore, let it be known to all living in the unity of faith and awaiting the mercy of Christ that Adelides, by the gift of God the Countess, the resources of my right, which came to me by the decree of Lord King Rudolph, my sweetest and most beloved brother. This is the monastery called Romanence, which is located in the Waldensian region, with all the abbey and all the things and adjacent properties pertaining to that abbey long ago ordained by the Holy Fathers there. This aforementioned Romanence monastery was once constructed in honor of the chief apostles, namely Peter and Paul, under monastic profession, but now deprived entirely of their habitation, for the love of our Lord Jesus Christ and of those same apostles, from my right and domination, I, the aforementioned Adelides, transfer it entirely into the ownership and care of the monks, that is, of the venerable and most reverend Abbot Odo, and all the brothers and the company of monks living under his administration in the Cluniac monastery. On the sole condition that these monks, as much as they are able, strive to reform that monastery to its former state through the intercession of the apostles, with Christ's favor. The abbot mentioned earlier, along with the monks, will hold the monastery as long as he lives. Although it's assigned to the apostolic seat, just like Cluny, they will always operate as one congregation under a single abbot. so much so that when he steps down, neither they nor anyone else can appoint a new abbot without mutual agreement, nor should they, God forbid, assume the right to appoint anyone other than the one chosen by the community, as it would be unjust for those who grew up like sons to the Roman monastery to separate from the Cluny community, who, like fathers, renew the place. Indeed, when appointing an abbot, the rule of Saint Benedict should always be followed. If even a small group from either congregation wants to choose a wiser leader, the others should agree in accordance with the rule. Regarding the transfer of brothers or resources for greater benefit, it will be at the abbot's discretion to move them from one place to another as needed. To maintain a strong bond among them, they shall uphold the same practices for divine service, alms, or any good work collectively. What is done at Cluny for the remembrance of William or others, living or deceased, should benefit us and our people, and what has been done at the Roman monastery for us, according to the Lord's will, they shall share in equally. I am making this donation primarily out of love for God and the holy apostles. Also, for the soul of my brother and dear Lord, King Rodolph, the original giver of these items. Additionally, for the memory of my Lord, Prince Richard, and for Queen Willa. This includes myself, my son King Rodolph, and my grandson, King Rodolph. I also include my other sons, Hugo and Boson, and my grandson Louis. This extends to our other relatives and those in our service. For my father and mother, Lord Hugo the distinguished abbot, and our other relatives from both sides. Finally, for those who will provide assistance or protection to the monks living there. This is for the welfare of the entire religion and for all Catholics, living or deceased. The monks residing there should maintain the way of life now being transferred to guide those who will come from Cluny. This means they should not reduce this way of life in terms of food and clothing, abstinence, psalm singing, silence, hospitality, mutual love and subjection, and good obedience. It's also stated in this testament that from this day forward, the monks gathered there should not fall under the control of us, our parents, royal power, or any earthly authority. No secular princes, no count, no bishop, and not even the pontiff of Rome should, by the Lord and in the Lord, with all his saints and the day of the fearful judgment, invade the property of these servants of God. Nor should they disperse, diminish, offer it as a grant, or appoint any prelate over them against their will. And to more effectively deter all reckless and dishonest individuals, I further emphasize this prohibition. I implore you, holy apostles and glorious leaders of the earth, Peter and Paul, as well as you, the highest priest of the apostolic seat, through the canonical and apostolic authority you've received from God, please separate those who rob, invade, or take away these offerings from the fellowship of the Holy Church of God and eternal life. I gladly and willingly give these to the aforementioned servants of God. Be the protectors and defenders of the mentioned place in Rome, of the servants of God residing there, and of all these resources, for the sake of the alms, mercy, and compassion of our most merciful Redeemer. If by any chance, God forbid, and which I trust in God's mercy and the apostles' protection won't happen, anyone from near or distant relations, or from any position or authority, tries with any deceit to go against this testament, which I've established for the love of Almighty God and the reverence of the apostles Peter and Paul, let them first incur the wrath of Almighty God. May the Lord remove their father from the land of the living and erase their name from the book of life. Let their fate be with those who said to God, Lord, leave us, and with Dathan and Abiram, whom the earth swallowed with an open mouth and hell consumed alive. Let them face eternal damnation, becoming a companion of Judas, the betrayer of the Lord, and be held in eternal torment. Although it may not seem apparent now that he will escape human judgment without punishment, he will endure the torments of future damnation in his own body, sharing a fate similar to Heliodorus and Antiochus. One barely survived after being severely whipped, while the other died miserably, struck by divine will, with rotting limbs and swarming worms. Let him join the ranks of other sacrilegious people who dared to desecrate the Lord's treasury. Unless he repents, he will have the chief guardian of all churches, along with St. Paul, as an adversary, denying him access to the delightful paradise. He could have had them as compassionate intercessors if he wished. According to the worldly law, let him pay 100 pounds of gold to those he has wronged, compelled by judicial authority, and let his efforts come to nothing. But may the firmness of this will, supported by all authority, remain unviolated and unshaken, with a stipulation attached. Signed by Adelaide, the royal countess mother and abbess who authorized and ordered this will. Signed by Hildegard, an unworthy priest. Signed by Ulrich. Signed by Judith, daughter of King Rudolph. Signed by Albreda. Signed by Wido. Signed by Heinrich. Signed by Hugo, illustrious Count and brother of the august King Rudolph. Signed by Goffred. Signed by Rudolph, son of Emperor Louis. Signed by Stephen, Christian, Gonfrid, Umbert, Boso, Bavo, Leodfrid, Lietger, Rudolph. Dated 14th June. I, Hildebrand, a priest, wrote and signed on behalf of the Chancellor in the 5th year of the reign of the most glorious King Rudolph, in the second indiction, done publicly in the village of Boyaco. Thus far, the decree. From the Roman monastery, the Book of Priories in the Cluniac Library contains this: the Priory of the Roman Monastery, Romansmünster, in the Diocese of Lausanne, where there should be, including the prior, 22 monks, although there were more in ancient times, as recorded, and there should be celebrated there 3 masses with chant, etc. Let's return to the region of Macon, where the abbey called Charlus is located. On December 26, in the year 932, Pope John XI granted this abbey to Odo from the Cluniac Monastery, at the request of Hugh, the king, or Duke of Burgundy, during the 11th year of his pontificate, in the 5th indiction. Louis the Transmarine also confirmed this with letters that can be found in the Cluny Library, column 276. King Boso had previously restored this abbey to the monks at the request of Count Cyrold E. This is evident from a charter published by Guichenon in the History of Savoy, page 375, where the monastery of Charlus is noted to be dedicated in honor of Saint Stephen, situated in the county of Macon on the Cernon River. The diploma was issued on December 3, in the 12th indiction, during the first year of Boso's reign at the Charlus Monastery, which corresponds to the year 879. For more about Charlus, refer to Aimard below. Finally, besides other monasteries whose records we lack, Gallican monasteries were given to the Cluniacs under Odo. Some Italian monasteries also came under Cluniac control at that time, namely Suppantonia, Adventino, and St. Paul in Rome, as noted by John, and the one in Salerno, whose monks dedicated Odo's life to John. It's very likely that St. Peter in Ticino was among them, since Odo, upon returning from Rome, left John, who was then a canon and later a monk, to be educated there, as he mentions about himself in Book 1, number 4. This is the monastery of St. Peter in Coelho Ario, later called St. Augustine after the transfer of his body to that place, which we mentioned in Part 1 of the 3rd century. Authors have varied accounts about the origins of the Church of St. Paul near Rome. Some attribute its founding to Pope Sylvester and Emperor Constantine. Leo Allatius supports this view in Book 1 on the agreement of both churches, Chapter 6, number 26, where he states that the Basilica of St. Paul on the Ostian Way, originally facing east, was built by Sylvester. However, Emperor Valentinian, under the direction of Pope Siricius, transformed it into the structure we see today, facing east. Interestingly, Peter Damian credits Constantine as the founder of the Vatican Basilica of St. Peter, and attributes the Ostian Basilica of St. Paul to Theodosius the Elder and his son Honorius. You can find this in the 4th work, 4th response of the Royal Defender. Much later, Emperor Theodosius initiated the construction of the Basilica of St. Paul. After his passing, his son Honorius finished it. I found the same information in a very old manuscript from the Church of Noyon, written 800 years ago. It contains the etymologies of Isidore, where it states, in the Basilica of St. Paul the Apostle in Rome, where his sacred body is buried, Theodosius began, and Honorius completed the hall, dedicated to the Doctor of the World, Paul's sacred body. This is also supported by Prudentius, a contemporary author, in his hymn 12 about the Blessed Peter and Paul. In another section, the title of Paul preserves the Ostian Way, where the earth is bordered on the left, the places of regal splendor. A good prince consecrated these towers and skillfully enhanced the surrounding area. He installed gilded panels on the beams, so that all the light inside would glow like the dawn. He also placed Parian columns under the gilded ceilings, arranged in a fourfold order. Then he adorned the vaulted arches with magnificently varied glass. Thus, the meadows gleam with spring flowers. This is about the origin of the basilica. When it was granted to the monks needs further investigation. John suggests it happened before Odo, in Book 1, number 27, where he mentions that 5 years before writing his life, Odo went to Rome. He rebuilt the monastery within the Church of the Most Blessed Apostle Paul, as it once was, at the urging of the Lord Pope and all the orders of the Sacred See. Thus, there had once been a seat of monks there, which Odo restored around the year 937 during his time in Rome, as we will explain later. The same John mentions the monastery of St. Paul and the monks in various parts, and also refers to Abbot Baldwin. He also reports that Saint Odo, when in Rome, often stayed there, especially in Book 2, numbers 21 and 22. There's no doubt about it, as John himself stayed there with Odo. Yet, in a respected book about the life of St. John, Abbot of Gors, it mentions that Andrew, a monk, was sent to Rome at the request of Pope Agapatus. Agapatus had earnestly asked Lord Einold, the Abbot of Gors, to send some religious men to the monastery of St. Paul, which he was trying to convert into a monastic order with the help of King Alberic. Andrew went with another brother, who had come to Gors from the monastery of Luxeuil a few years earlier. After establishing monastic practices there, he was soon received by the Lord and was buried there. Pope Agapatus began his papacy in the 4th year after Odo's death, in 946 AD. So, how could it be that the monastery of St. Paul, which had been imbued with monastic practices under Odo, was transferred again to the monastic order under Pope Agapatus? This should be understood as a restoration of regular discipline, which is surprising to see had deteriorated so quickly. It certainly declined during the reign of Otto II, or at least that was the pretext. Otto, who intended to establish canons at St. Paul's instead of disobedient monks, is mentioned by Rodulphus Glauber in Book 1, Chapter 4. Whatever the case, the monastery of St. Paul in Ostia, although not entirely subject to Cluny, still often received superiors from there. Peter Damian provides evidence of this in his 33rd work, where he discusses St. Malus, who appointed a prior at St. Paul's, as we will mention in the Acts of St. Malus. Finally, this is explicitly confirmed by Hugh of Cluny in a letter to Abbot Pontius with these words: "This monastery, namely St. Paul's, was entrusted to your predecessor, Saint Odo, in subsequent years, where for some time the spirit of the Cluniac order shone through him." With the city disrupted by rebellious unrest, a situation it often faces in unfortunate circumstances, the monks, burdened by these troubles, decided to leave, taking with them the sacred relics of the apostolic ashes, particularly those of St. Paul. They quickly made their way to Cluny. The abbot of the monastery of St. Paul was Adam, whom Pope Victor III mentions in Book 2 of the Miracles of St. Benedict, Chapter 25. John Baptist Maris raises a question about which congregation the monastery of St. Paul was subject to at that time, Cluniac or Cassinensian. This doubt arises because, according to Leo of Ostia in Book 1 of the Chronicle of Monte Cassino, Chapter 58, the abbey of St. Paul was entrusted to Abbot Baldwin by Pope Marinus. Thus, Desiderius, or Pope Victor, who was also the abbot of Monte Cassino, refers to the monastery of St. Paul as our monastery. However, he might have spoken in this manner considering the common order, as there was neither a Cassinensian congregation nor a Cluniac congregation in the form it later took under St. Hugh. Odo prescribed a uniform way of living for all these and many other monasteries, similar to what was observed at Cluny, and he acted like a general abbot over them. This system, first instituted by St. Pachomius in the east, was attempted in the west by Benedict of Agnan and was finally perfected by Odo. Because of this, some considered him the founder of the Order of St. Benedict in France, as he united many monasteries, which were previously partly destroyed and completely separated from each other, into one body. From the time of Peter the Venerable, Odo has been called the supreme restorer of the monastic order in France, the principal reformer of the rule, and the first father of the Cluniac order. He endeavored to revive the fervor of the monastic purpose, which was nearly extinct and almost forgotten everywhere, as noted in Book 6, Letter 17. Similarly, before him, Frodord in his chronicle refers to Odo as a restorer of many monasteries and of the Holy Rule. Glauber Rodolph states, "He was such a strong supporter of this institution that the most significant monasteries from the Beneventan province, as well as those in Italy and Gaul up to the Ocean Sea, were delighted to be under his authority. His fame and religious reputation were so renowned that not only noble lay people and clerics, but even bishops, gave up their positions to join him, as noted by John in Book 3, Number 10. Chapter 6, The Growth of the Cluny Abbey under Odo. Odo not only greatly enhanced the religious practices of the Cluny institution, but also significantly increased its wealth, which often follows closely. Firstly, King Rudolph of the Franks, at the request of his wife Ima, the sister of Hugh, granted lands to Cluny located in the Macon region, including 3 in Salaret, among others. This was given at the village of Boisseau on July 1, in the 10th year of his reign, the 3rd indiction, year 444, which is the year 931. In the following year, Bishop Berno of Macon, encouraged by Archambauld, the prior of the Cluny monastery, and Hildebrand, while sitting in a council near the church of St. Vincent in Macon to settle divine commands in the manner of the preceding fathers, granted the tithes of the land of Salaret, which King Rudolph had given them. In the same year, the 10th year of King Rudolph, Bishop Berno consecrated a chapel in the village of Salaret, which the small Cluny community, supported by Odo, their gentle father and abbot, had built. 2 years later, Count Leopold of Macon and his wife Ermengarde gave to Abbot Odo whatever they owned in the village of Darbonnais in the Lyon region, by the river Saône, so that God might spare the souls of their parents Alberic and Escalana, Matisses and Ermengarde, as well as their friend Gerard, from the pains of hell. After Leopold and Ermengarde, Count Goffred and others signed the document. This document is recorded with some errors in the Library of Sebisiana on page 168, and you can find more about Leopold on pages 236 and 296. In 936, a piece of land in the village of Ruffy, near Cluny in the Macon region, was given to Odo in May, when King Rudolf passed away. This was done in Cluny and confirmed publicly at the castle of Lernand. In the second year of King Louis's reign, Abbot Odo and the monks of Cluny purchased a field below the castle of Lernand, commonly called Lourdes, which was later demolished by the order of Cardinal Richelieu. In the same year that King Rodolphe passed away, Count Goffredus and his wife Eva donated escazolas in the Aiguines region for the sake of their souls and for the soul of their lord William and his son Bozon. They also gave Kytylos in the Matissins region, in the Vicariate of Bouffarias, for the salvation of their souls and that of Gosbert, the brother of Goffredus, during the 5th year of Louis from overseas. In the 2nd year of Louis's reign, Bishop Mamboldus of the Matissins reported that his predecessor Bernan had granted the Cluniacensians full control over all their churches. However, after these churches were destroyed by pagan invasions and the wickedness of corrupt people, he reduced the synodal tribute they used to pay. The canons signed, and among them, Abbot Addo, a leading figure, donated several items to the Cluniacensian monastery, including the churches of St. Desiderius and St. Julian in Civiac and Davijac, in the 12th year of Louis's reign. Also, in the 2nd year, Bishop Rotmund of the Aiguines donated the chapel of St. Leodegar of Blaiac in the county of Matissins, which his most holy predecessor Wallo had granted to a certain priest for life. Witnesses to this were Hildebaldus and Gerbaldus, both abbots. In the 3rd year of the same king, during the 11th indiction, which corresponds to the year 938 AD, a holding in the village of Modeliac in the Luschanens region, in the Ternitans field, was given to the Cluniacensian monastery, under the leadership of Abbot Odo. Additionally, a man named Erich gave Abbot Odo a field with a forest in the Luschanens region, in the Tarnatans field, at the edge of Dinadaliac. This place was undoubtedly Ternatum, where the Tarnatans monastery was situated, often confused with the Gaunans, but this Ternatum was located by the Rhone, at the border of the Luschanens and Viennans regions, commonly known as Tournai, where there is now a priory of the Order of Saint Benedict. Also, in the 3rd year of his reign, Louis from overseas confirmed by charter the Cluniacensian properties in Corset at Dociac, which is preserved in the Cluniacensian library. These are some smaller donations I made, like when Hugo, the Count, gave a maidservant from the Villa Romanis in the Lognensis region to the Cluny monastery and Abbot Odo. This happened in the 6th year of King Louis's reign. After that year, donations were given to Abbot Aymar. All charters under Odo are numbered 188. Moreover, from all these charters, and others that we will mention with Aymar, it's evident that Macon, along with its assigned region, was under the authority of the king of the Franks, not the Burgundians. Chapter 6. Odo's multiple journeys to Rome for the sake of the Church. Odo's passionate dedication to divine matters didn't confine him within monasteries. Instead, he ventured out to benefit the entire Church. The Roman popes repeatedly summoned him to Italy to use his wisdom and authority in assisting the Church through its difficulties. The reason for his first trip to Rome was this: after Emperor Berengar's death, Hugh, the son of Theobald, Count of Arles, took control of Italy. Marozia, the infamous widow of Guido, Count of Tuscany, who along with her son Alberic, had seized Pope John and taken control of Rome, invited Hugh through messengers to marry her and take up the rule of the city. Hugh accepted the offer, and after marrying her, he took control of Rome. Meanwhile, during a feast, when Alberic, at his mother's urging, awkwardly offered water to wash Hugh's hands, Hugh hit him in the face to correct him. Offended by this, Alberic incited the Romans to revolt and forced Hugh to flee the city. After Hugh fled, Alberic governed the city with his mother Marozia under consular power, restoring the old order of Rome along with the name and role of the consuls. These events occurred around the year 929, during the pontificates of John X, Leo VI, and Stephen VII, followed by John XI in 931, who was Marozia's son from her affair with Sergius and Alberic's brother. The Holy Roman Church of God had to endure such challenges from Marozia and her son Alberic. In 933, messengers from the Church of Reims returned from Rome reporting that Pope John, son of Maria, also known as Marozia, was detained by his brother Alberic, who also kept their mother Marozia confined and held Rome against King Hugh. Shortly after, King Hugh of Italy besieged Rome. In the year 936, after Pope John, Alberic's brother, died, a servant of God named Leo was appointed pope in Rome, specifically Leo VII, as Fraudord soon adds. King Hugh of Italy attempted to capture Rome. However, after his army suffered from hunger and lost many horses, he eventually made peace with Alberic by offering his daughter in marriage, and he abandoned the siege. Now, let's determine the year Odo was first summoned to Rome by the Pope. Baronius suggests this happened in 936, the same year King Hugh gave his daughter, whom Liutprand, a deacon from Ticino and a writer of that era, calls Alda, in marriage to Alberic, thus ending his attack on Rome. Baronius is indeed correct. While preparing for his journey to Rome, Odo visited Adhegrin and learned through a revelation of Saint Martin about the anointing of Louis the Transmarine, which also occurred in 936. Odo undertook this journey for two reasons. First, to reconcile King Hugh with Prince Alberic, as Odo was highly favored by the king, which is evident from the three privileges Hugh obtained from the Roman popes for Odo's benefit, specifically from John XI, Leo VI, and Leo VII. Second, to rebuild the monastery within the Church of St. Paul the Apostle, as it had been before, at the urging of the Lord Pope and all the orders of the Holy See, as mentioned in John, Book 1, number 27, where it discusses the anointing of Louis the Transmarine. Then, Odo corrected and annotated the life of Saint Martin in Rome at St. Paul's, as noted in Book 2, number 22. It's fitting to refer here to what John writes in Book 2, number 9. In the past, when King Hugh besieged the city of Rome due to enmity with the aforementioned Prince Alberic, he began to go back and forth, spreading messages of peace and harmony between them, so that he might calm the anger of the mentioned king and protect the city from such a siege. Meanwhile, one day, as he was near the monastery of St. Andrew the Apostle, located on the slope of Scaurus, a certain peasant wanted to kill him over a small flask of water. Alberic wanted to punish the peasant with death, but Odo stopped him. This shows the great reverence not only King Hugh but also Alberic had for Odo. Another sign of Alberic's goodwill towards Odo was that he entrusted him with restoring the monastery of St. Elias at Sepentonia, as noted by John in Book 3, number 7, 38. Odo's second journey to Rome didn't occur in the year 938 but in the following year. John clearly states at the beginning of Book 1 with these words, "In the year of the Lord's incarnation 939, and in the 60th year of his life, in the 30th year of his monastic life, coming to Rome, he found me entangled in worldly ties, and mercifully caught me in his net, and led me to the monastery of St. Peter in Ticino. For a short time, detained there by Hugh, the aforementioned Lord Hildebrand entrusted me to be educated in the regular disciplines. Therefore, John was not Odo's companion on the first journey." John adds, "Not long after, coming to Rome, he graciously chose me as his companion, and when he returned, he brought back the one he had taken as a canon from his parents as a monk." From this, we understand that John was a native of Rome and a canon there. This return to Rome happened while Pope Leo was still alive, thus in the year 939, or at least at the beginning of the next year, perhaps before Odo returned to France. John confirms this timeline in Book 2, number 7. At the same time, we were sent to Italy by Pope Leo to serve as ambassadors of peace between Hugh, the king of the Lombards, and Alberic, the prince of the city of Rome. This relates to what John mentions in Book 1, number 22. 3 years ago, while we were at St. Paul's in Rome, etc. John wrote this shortly after Odo's death, which occurred at the end of the year 942 and what he refers to in Book 1, number 16. Perhaps at that time, he made a pilgrimage to Mount Gargano, which is mentioned in Book 2, number 15. Finally, in the year 942, Odo was called to Rome for the third time by Pope Stephen IX to reconcile King Hugh with the same Alberic. Fraudordus for this year. Lord Odo, the abbot, was striving to make peace between King Hugh of Italy and Alberic, the Roman patrician. In his efforts for the church, the holy man aged and grew weak. In Rome, after falling ill, he received a reprieve from God so he could return to Tours at St. Martin's. As we will soon learn from John, if Odo did not return to France in the year 939, then Gerard, the bishop of Reggio, who accompanied him on the second journey, as mentioned in the Book of Life, Book 2, number 6, did. Otherwise, it was during the third journey, as evidenced by these words that show John was with them. At that time, when we crossed the Caudian Alps with Gerard, bishop of the Church of Reggio, and came to Rome, etc. However, those who place Odo's fourth journey to Rome before the last one might not be far from the truth. Indeed, The 3 journeys we just mentioned were undertaken for the Church's sake. John notes another journey for the purpose of prayer in book number 18. But enough about these matters. Chapter 7. Odo's illness, death, burial, relics, and veneration. As the holy man sensed his end was near, he often reflected on his past mistakes, particularly those made against his abbot during his layman's years. He once spoke to John in Book 3, Section 6, "Dearest son, listen to what I say to you. I thank God because, for all the sins I have committed since my youth, I have already faced retribution in this life, except for those against my abbot. I have always awaited that day and time, praying to God that they would not be reserved for me in the future." This was just before his final pilgrimage to Rome in the year 942. Before this journey, he seemed to have appointed Amar as abbot in his place, as we will explore later in Amar's eulogy. During this period, struck by a severe and unrelenting fever, he longed for heavenly life but greatly desired to visit St. Martin's tomb one last time, to end his days where he began his pious life. Through the merits of his esteemed patron, whom he deeply revered, he was granted this wish from heaven. He recovered, returned, and attended the celebration on November 10th as he wished. However, on the 4th day within the octave, the fever returned and worsened until, finally, the blessed man, strengthened by divine nourishment and the viaticum, passed into heaven with Martin as his guide on November 18th. John elaborates on this at the end of Book 3. Now Gaddis adds some unique details, noting that Odo gathered the brothers, organized the monasteries under his care, and entrusted Cluny to God. He kept only his chapel, the sacred furnishings for the Mass, and returned everything else to Cluny. These might be speculations of the author. What is more certain is that he adds Odo was buried in Tours in the Church of St. Julian, which he himself had restored, funded by Archbishop Theodulin, as previously mentioned. This style of speaking is common among authors and those like them, but we should also pay attention to the necrologist of the monastery of St. Julian. After the most reverend man, Odo, had built many monasteries, corrected many things, and taught many to scorn the foolishness of the world, he wrote useful works for the Church and elegantly composed hymns and antiphons in praise of the Blessed Martin. Already an old man, weary with the burden of age, as if aware of his approaching end, he wished, once he laid down the burden of his body, to return to his own monastery at Tours to be buried near the body of his special patron, Lord Martin, if possible. Meanwhile, as the feast of the Blessed Martin approached, the venerable father proceeded to the morning ceremonies with his monks long before dawn. On the 8th day of his illness, sensing his final hour was near, with all the brothers standing around, he made sure he was fortified with the provision of the body and blood of the Lord. Then he ordered himself to be carried to the church of St. Alban, which was nearby, and with pious lights and hands raised to heaven, he returned his soul to Christ. To this day, the oratory of St. Alban remains within the cloisters of the aforementioned monastery. He passed away on November 18th and was buried by the often-mentioned Bishop Theodulin in the crypt of St. Julian, under the altar of that martyr, on the right side. These details come from the martyrology of the place, renewed to the old form in the year 1469, in the month of July, during the time of Pope Paul II, King Louis XI, and Archbishop Elias, who are the figures of the Reformed martyrology. Now Gaddis marks the year of Odo's death as 945, which he counts as the 18th year of his ordination. However, the authority of Frodord, a contemporary writer, is preferred. He asserts that Odo died 2 years earlier with these words, found in the Chronicle at the end of the year 942. Lord Odo, the venerable abbot, restorer of many monasteries and repairer of the Holy Rule, died at Tours and was buried at St. Julian. Nothing clearer can be presented both to determine the year of death and the place of burial. As noted, this year aligns with John's calculation, who states in Book 3, number 5, that he did not live with Odo for a full 2 years. Unfortunate me, he laments, that I did not deserve to serve him for even 2 complete years. He actually joined him at the start of the year 940, as mentioned in the previous chapter. This same year is also noted by Abbot Hugh of Flavigny in his Chronicle. In this year, Lord Odo the Venerable, who restored many monasteries, after working tirelessly to mediate peace between Hugh, King of Italy, and Alberic, the Roman patrician, passed away at Tours. However, this needs correction. He was buried at St. Martin, which is also referenced on the edge of Frodord's Chronicle in the previously mentioned text. It becomes clear from the same chronicle in the year 945 that this is an error, as Archbishop Teotilo of Tours is reported to have died and been buried in the monastery of St. Julian, which the same holy man had dedicated near Lord Odo's tomb. From that time onward, the temple is said to be illuminated by divine miracles. Therefore, Hugh of Flavini should be corrected, just as Peter of Equilinum, who asserts that Odo was buried at Cluny. The anonymous writer cited by Chesnius in Volume 3, page 341, is entirely accurate. In the same year, specifically the reign of King Louis VII, Lord Odo, a religious and wise abbot of many monasteries, learned and eloquent, rested in peace and was buried at Tours at St. Julian. The burial place is accurately recorded by the Chronicle of Malleusence, although it incorrectly lists the year of death as 938. The Dolens Chronicle, noted by Labbé in Volume 1 of the New Library, page 315, adds, in the year 942, Saint Odo, the second abbot of Dole, died. Thus, in the year 942, Odo passed away at the age of 64, in the 15th year of his leadership at Cluny. His remains were preserved in the Church of St. Julian at least until the 15th century. The first evidence of this matter can be found in the letters of the society established between Cluny and the Monastery of St. Julian in October of the year 1117. At that time, Lord Pontius, the abbot of Cluny, visited Tours at St. Martin's for prayer. He turned to us, so say the monks of St. Julian in the letters, out of love for our patron, the blessed Odo, and his own, with the utmost devotion. On the eve of St. Denis, he celebrated a Mass for the most blessed Odo with both our monks and his own. Then, taking with him his prior, Bernard Crassus, and other brothers, he came to our chapter, and so forth. Long after that, in the year 1407, John, the Archbishop of Tours, invited by Robert, the abbot of St. Julian, transferred the sacred relics into new cases. This was done in the presence of Mary, Queen of France, her daughter Magdalene, John, Duke of Bourbon, James, Count of Marche, and other distinguished persons. Among these relics, in the fourth case, the body of Saint Odo the abbot was contained, as solemn letters concerning this matter testify, stating as follows. John, by divine mercy, Archbishop of Tours, to all who will inspect these present letters, eternal health in the Lord. Whatever praise or honor we bestow on the saints of God, we offer the same, as the prophet bears witness, with the Lord commanding to praise him in his saints. Therefore, with the passing of Brother William, of good memory, once the abbot of the monastery of St. Julian of Tours, of the Benedictine Order, it was considered that although the church of the said monastery was adorned with the bodies, relics, and presence of many saints, by whose and other glorious saints' intercessions and prayers who rest in this our city, not only the monastery itself but the entire city flourished with successful outcomes, the bodies and relics were nevertheless less reverently stored, and due honor was not shown to them. Driven by deep devotion, the abbot arranged during his lifetime to have 5 wooden boxes crafted, adorned with silver and gold on the inside, with the hope of placing relics and bodies in them. However, as fate would have it, he passed away before he could complete this task himself. His wishes were carried forward by the dedicated and devout brothers, including Robert, the current abbot, and the whole congregation of the monastery. They earnestly asked us to place the prepared relics and bodies in the designated areas. We hereby announce that we, fully embracing the pious wishes of the late Brother William, the former abbot, and the esteemed current abbot and congregation, in honor of the glory and magnificence of Almighty God, on the date of this document, in the presence of the most Christian Lady Mary, the illustrious Queen of the Franks, and her renowned daughter Lady Madeleine, as well as the noble princes Lord John, Duke of Bourbon, and James, Count of March, along with many other barons, knights, and noble persons, and the venerable and wise men listed below, transferred and reinterred with our own hands the bodies and relics from the old sarcophagi into the new boxes, which we had previously consecrated and blessed according to the Church's rites. We followed this order. In the first box near the dormitory of the monastery, the body of St. Paul, Bishop of Leon. In the second box, the body of St. Anthony, abbot of the monastery of St. Julian of Tours. In the third and largest box, parts of the bodies of St. Ponelean and St. Columba, along with many other relics whose names are unknown to us. In the fourth box, the body of Saint Odo, the first abbot of Cluny, and then of the monastery of St. Julian. In the fifth and final box, the body of St. Lawrence, abbot. After completing these translations, we secured the chests with silver and gold locks on the outside, and we fortified them with our blessing, trusting in divine mercy. We have instructed the aforementioned religious followers and their successors to celebrate this day of translation festively every year from now on. We urge them to observe it with the appropriate and necessary divine services. As proof and testimony of all the aforementioned, we have arranged for 2 copies of our letters to be made and signed by the notaries below. We have ordered them to be secured with the attachment of our seal. One of these we have enclosed in the larger chest mentioned above, and the other we have granted to the aforementioned abbot and convent to be placed in the church's treasury. This was given at the aforementioned monastery on January 22, 1407, with the venerable fathers and brothers Guido of the major monastery near Tours, Robert of St. Julian, and Peter of Cormery from our diocese, who were abbots of the order. Also present were the wise men Lords John Campidonarius, Doctor of Decrees, General Preceptor of St. Anthony of Touraine in Germany, and Orator for the Duke of Austria, William Le Picart, Treasurer, John Preselli, Archdeacon of Transliger, John Nulati, Archdeacon of Tours, Nicholas Pertorelli, Official, Victor Hugnetai, William Joubert, Canon of our church in Tours, along with James of Cormery, Prior of the Cloister and Infirmary, John, Almoner of the Provost, Philip, Chamberlain of the Provost, John Chartier, Sacristan, William Duvieux, Innkeeper, John Gieber, Cantor, Guido Auger, Subcantor, William Boutet of Beauvau, and Michael Bellano of Gurkia, James Otteran of Castro Rejaldi, Peter Audbert of St. Anthony, John Celian of Bouel, Robert Halones of Ambillo, Priors, William of Lier, John Fafou, Peter Joulon, Deacon, Peter Sordeau, John Lenfant, Americo de Mondanier, John of Fonte, John Boudet, Andrew of France, and John of Tours, religious of the monastery of St. Julian, with many others in attendance. Thus signed by Fowler and the Master. Since then, there has been no mention of Saint Odo's relics in the records of the monastery of St. Julian, even though his tibia bone is kept there. It's possible they were taken to the island of Jordan near Toulouse, where the canons claim to have them. This might have happened during the heretic uprisings when sacred relics in Tours were scattered by a profane fire, sparing neither the relics of St. Martin, which had always been honored worldwide. It's noteworthy that the body of St. Lowry, the abbot mentioned earlier, is documented, even though he isn't included in the Gallican Martyrology. His feast was recently celebrated at St. Julian on October 1st, but it has now been moved to the following day due to the double feast of St. Remigius. Our community at Fleury claims the body of St. Paul, the Bishop of Lyon, based on the authority of Amwenus. He asserts that Bishop Mabillon transferred it to the monastery of Fleury, as stated in Book 2 of the Miracles of St. Benedict, Chapter 11, 45. Let's return to Saint Odo, whose veneration was embraced by the Cluniacenses from the time of his death, specifically on November 19. This was due to the octave of St. Martin coinciding with the day of his death. For this reason, he is mentioned on that day in the Brivitense manuscript and some other martyrologies. In Ulrich's book One of the Customs of the Cluniacenses, Chapter 11, where various annual celebrations are listed, the deposition of Saint Odo is among those celebrated in white vestments. His honorable memory is found in the Roman, Benedictine, and Gallican martyrologies, where he is mentioned 3 times, on November 20 and 19, and in the supplement on November 18. At the island of Jordan near Toulouse, the veneration of the sacred body of Saint Odo, abbot of Cluny, is noted. His body was transferred from the church of St. Julian of Tours, where he was first buried after passing away. Finally, Bernard, in his Apology to Abbot William, and before him, Gregory VII in the Roman Council, recognized Odo as a saint, as did all the Cluniacensian abbots before them. A sermon about Saint Odo is found among the additions to the Cluniacensian library, to be read on his feast day, which is essentially a sermon by Saint Maximus on Blessed Eusebius, Bishop of Vercelli. Lastly, Peter the Equilinian attests that Saint Odo lives on through miracles. Chapter 8. Odo's Writings and Wise Sayings about the Morals of His Age. Let's now focus on the works of Odo himself, setting aside those of others. Some of his writings were done as a canon, others as a monk, and still others as an abbot. As a canon, he summarized the morals of Gregory the Great, as we mentioned earlier in Chapter 2, and composed hymns about Saint Martin and antiphons, drawing from John in Book 1, number 10. As a monk, he wrote 3 small books inspired by the prophecies of Jeremiah concerning the priesthood, which he dedicated to Turpion, Bishop of Limoges, as noted by John in Book 1, number 37. These books are sometimes referred to by the name of his duties, and the published versions are called collations. Finally, as an abbot, he authored other works, specifically 4 books about the life of Saint Gerald, Count of Aurillac, dedicated to Aymoin, abbot of the monastery of Saint Martial in Limoges, according to the local chronicle. The Chronicle of Aurillac refers to him as Aymoin, abbot of Toul. Perhaps he oversaw both places. Abbot Odo also wrote a brief work about the return of the body of Saint Martin from Burgundy, at the request of Fulk the Good, Count of Anjou. He also penned a short text on why Martin is considered equal to the apostles, and various sermons, the fourth and last of which in the published collection addresses the burning of the Basilica of Saint Martin. An anonymous chronicler praises his sermon about Saint Benedict, delivered during his translation to Fleury, as mentioned by Chesnius in Volume 3, page 341. All these works are housed in the Cluniac Library, along with hymns about the Holy Sacrament and Mary Magdalene. In addition to the published works, he revised the life of Saint Martin in Rome at St. Paul's, providing explanations with glosses, as John confirms in Book 2, number 22. The same author in Book 3, number 11, mentions a book about the arrival of Saint Benedict in the region of Orleans, a book we lament has been lost. A booklet about the life of Gregory of Tours, as published by Surius, is attributed to Abbot Odo in some manuscript copies. This life is titled in the Code of Saint Sergius of Anjou as follows: Prologue to the Life of Saint Gregory of all the Saints, etc. And after the prologue, it begins, Here begins the life of Saint Gregory, Bishop of Tours, written by Odo. Gregory, from the Celtic region of Gaul, played a significant role in the city of Tours and the monastery of Saint Julian. This is why I dedicate this book to Odo, who served as the abbot there. In a parchment manuscript from the Discalced Carmelites in Paris, originally belonging to the Abbey of Saint Julian of Tours, there's a lengthy metrical work titled The Work of Lord Odo the Abbot begins. It starts with these verses. Beloved brother, a holy love fills you, I rejoice. The thirst for justice is the honor of the heart, it is dignity. Your heart grieves to be flowing, and yet you wonder why from yours. Therefore, you wish for a poem. Perhaps so this binds it, lest it flows. The work consists of 4 books. The first covers the work of God, the second discusses the creation of man, the third deals with his fall and the corruption of human nature, and the fourth focuses on the fathers of the Old Testament up to Christ the Restorer. The manuscript ends with the work of Lord Odo, the abbot concludes. Many believe it was written by Saint Odo due to its origin from Saint Julian's monastery, where Odo was abbot, and its writing style, which suggests Odo's era. Furthermore, his conferences in the Sylvanian Codex are titled Works of Saint Odo, which fittingly discuss grace. Baronius, or at least the compiler of the Index of the Annals in Volume 10, credits Odo with the book about the life of Saint Maurice the Abbot, which is known to be authored by Odo, the Abbot of Fossatensis. Some chronicles are incorrectly attributed to him, which were actually authored by Thomas of Lush. Thomas titled short chronicles in Odo's name, as noted by the writer of the History of the Counts of Anjou, found in Volume 10 of the Spice Elogium, page 400. Furthermore, C. Gibert and others note that Odo was skilled in composing church music. In the book about writers, chapter 124, it's mentioned, Odo the musician, a monk from the chief cantor of Tours and the first abbot of Cluny, had a talent for writing and delivering homilies, and especially for composing songs of the saints. The song about Saint Martin seems to be his. In his writings, Odo, especially in his discussions, highlights certain observations worth noting. He laments the decline of Christian morals in various places. In Book 2, Chapter 17, he says, We express what we can, at least to show that we are troubled by the wickedness of the depraved. Is it not rightly a cause for sorrow that Christianity, which ought to grow stronger as it progresses, is instead so far from its rightful state that its religion seems to have entirely failed? For we all hasten and rush toward evil. And in Book 1, Chapter 41, we must surely know that in our times almost everything has lost its order, and many call the wasteful spending of their resources charity, when things distributed lavishly for empty glory should rather be called feasting or waste than charity. Then in Book 2, Chapter 37, we should mourn the present time of life, in which everything is so confused that you see not even a trace of truth anywhere, but observe everything filled with wickedness and indulgence, and nothing is preserved justly and rightly. You see the humble, weak, and poorer people being oppressed, afflicted, and unjustly harmed by the proud, powerful, and wealthy, while anyone honest and peaceful is disturbed by many injuries. On the contrary, each worst person is loaded with power, becomes terrifying, and grows in wickedness with arrogant success. Neither the fear of judges nor the reverence for sacred authority can prevail against them or restrain their destruction in any way. But what do we say about judges? For even those who were established to restrain these things inflict heavier and more destructive storms on the unfortunate. This inequitable and unjust inequality is committed and practiced not only in cities but also in the countryside, and not only on land but also at sea. Among all the evils, the worst is that the habit of sinning has become so strong that almost no one can judge what is sinful. Just like Aaron didn't resist the Israelites when they asked for gods, today, it seems everyone is either wicked or gives in to wickedness. Read also what follows at the end of this chapter and Book 3, Chapter 28. He criticizes 3 main vices of his time: violence, which pertains to the aggressive, pride, and lust; These vices are discussed in depth in the first and second books. He adds a fourth in Book 2, Chapter 28, "It is truly sorrowful that people seem to turn away from Christ due to these three vices or others too shameful to mention. But it is far more distressing that they recklessly take part in the sacred mystery of the Lord's body. This is the greatest blessing among all the gifts given to humans. It is what God, with the greatest love, has granted to mortals, for the salvation of the world is entirely contained in this mystery. And certainly, when it is treated unworthily, divine majesty is most grievously offended every day. Therefore, we should mourn and lament over this, so that if we cannot correct it, we at least demonstrate our grief by speaking out, lest the voice of Christ reproach us, saying, 'I looked for someone to grieve with me, but there was none.'" This mystery was not celebrated as frequently at the beginning of the Church as it is now. However, the less frequent it was, the more devoutly it was conducted. This is what the very pious man says, who recounts two notable events, the first being about the relics of Saint Walburga, renowned for miracles. When her relics were placed on the altar, the miracles ceased. As the pilgrims were amazed, the Virgin appeared to one of the sick and said, "You are not healed because my relics are on the Lord's altar, where only the majesty of the divine mystery should be celebrated." When he reported this to the custodians, they removed the relics, and miracles immediately began to happen again. Odo adds that, due to the reverence for this mystery, even the saints do not wish their relics to be brought closer. So what should be thought about impurities? Another event involves a thief who was killed during his crime. When his body was taken to the church, the priest started to celebrate Mass for him. As he reached the words of the Lord's consecration, a terrifying noise filled the church, and the altar split all the way to its foundation, which is still evident. The priest, struck with great fear along with everyone else, fled and stopped offering the sacrifice for the apostate. "This was set against those," commented the holy man, "who promised to pray for the wicked for their own gain." Odo seems to have noted this to challenge those who, perhaps misled by a misunderstood testimony of Augustine, claim that the sacrifice of the Mass benefits the condemned, either to free them from punishments completely or to make their condemnation more bearable. This opinion is recorded by Adrivald in the book on the miracles of Saint Benedict, Chapter 21, where he says the people of Fleury prayed to the Lord for the souls of robbers slain in battle, so that if they did not deserve release from eternal torments, they might at least be punished with lesser pains by the strict judge. In the very old Gelonensian Codex, there is a Mass for a soul in doubt, which includes this prayer: "Almighty and merciful God, who has the power to kill and to bring to life again, to lead down to the underworld and to bring back, and who calls things that are not as though they were, whose power is full in heaven and on earth, in the sea and in the underworld, we humbly and tremblingly beseech you for the soul of your servant, whom you have taken from this present world without the opportunity for repentance, that if perhaps due to the severity of his crimes he does not deserve to rise to glory, through these sacred offerings the torments may at least become bearable." These and other things are from the 10th volume of the Fragments of our Claudius Stephanius, in the appendices concerning Saint Pachomius, found in the 3rd volume of May with the Bollandists. There are 336 references indicating that prayers for the condemned are forbidden, though it's believed that this punishment might somehow aid their relief. When the body of a deceased monk was being carried out in the absence of Pachomius, he encountered the procession and stopped the singing of psalms. To the parents of the deceased, he said, "If you wish to honor the dead with psalms, more severe and numerous torments will befall him. Therefore, I ask you, if you want to ease the deceased's sufferings, bury him without psalms, for God, being good and merciful, might offer him some rest for this dishonor done to him and bring him back to the life given from above." Papibrachius left out these last words, even though they are found in Greek, to avoid offending anyone. A similar belief led to the story of Trajan, which can be seen in Hepidin's Acts of Saint Wiberata the Recluse. Even if we exclude this final part, it remains that some people believed, or were mistaken, that the eternal punishments of the damned could somehow be lessened. Regardless of what one thinks of that opinion, which is rejected by today's common theological consensus, it is certain that the audacity of those who indiscriminately perform holy mass sacrifices for anyone who died even in the act of a grave crime, was rightly condemned by the Second Council of Valentia in Canon 12 against duelists. Augustine also established this in The City of God, Book 21, Chapter 24. The same reasoning applies to why we do not pray for people suffering eternal punishment, just as we do not pray now or then for evil angels. Similarly, although we pray for living people, even those who are evil, we do not pray for faithless and impious deceased individuals. However, in explaining their opinion, they extend God's mercies even to the torments of the wicked. They suggest that the wicked endure punishments that are milder and lighter than they deserve, not by human judgment, but through the reasoning of God's mercy. The same holy doctor, in Enchiridion, chapter 110, does not believe that sacrifices benefit those condemned to eternal punishment, but rather those facing temporary punishment. There is a way of living that is not so good as to need no remedy, nor so bad as to not benefit from it after death. Let's return to the main point. Odo also offers suitable advice to the monks and provides fitting criticism, especially against those who own property, eat meat, or violate the religious habit and rule. He calls them apostates, citing Gregory's testimony from the 9th homily on Ezekiel. Just as an apostate is one who abandons faith in God, so too is someone who returns to wicked deeds after professing religion considered an apostate by Almighty God, even if they seem to hold the faith. Odo adds, "Is it not apostasy to disregard the traditions of the fathers in clothing or diet, when God has forbidden transgressing the boundaries set by the fathers, desiring extravagant feasts with the children of Israel despite the food guidelines prescribed by Blessed Benedict? Is it not apostasy to scorn humble clothing and seek ornate garments? And is it not apostasy to worship the belly, when Paul, with tears, declares that gluttons are enemies of the Holy Cross, considering the belly their God? I say these charges of apostasy apply to us, as those among us in this age who are wanton and unruly have dared to change the religious habit that has been upheld for many years." This is from Book 3, Chapter 17. See Book 2, Chapter 7, and also Book 3, Chapter 22. Furthermore, he criticizes the proprietors who use their own funds to create extravagant equipment for performing the mysteries. They acquire these against the tradition and sanction of the Holy Fathers, using dishonest wealth. It's as if they believe they're leaving it for the Church's adornment, confidently holding on to it, as mentioned in Book 2, Chapter 34. In addressing the objections of the proprietors in Chapter 36, he states, "If, due to the negligence of the superiors alone, and not more because of their own greed, they had their own possessions, they would not presume to have other foods or clothes than those regularly established." These words clearly demonstrate the holy man's dedication to the Christian and monastic cause. I wish these rebukes did not apply to our time as well, where, speaking of some monks, there is so little religion invested in the regular practices that the Holy Fathers established and observed with such devotion. Chapter 9. Some notable disciples of Odo. To fully understand Odo's legacy, it's important to learn about his disciples, as their reputations significantly impact their masters. The challenge is that old records about them are scarce, and although John does mention some of Odo's disciples, he mostly only recorded their names. Among those worth noting are Arnulf and Landric, from whom John reports having received much information about Odo in his preface. He refers to one as his teacher and master, and the other as his fellow brother. Following them is Lord Hildebrandus or Hildebrand, described as a truthful man, and the prior of the Cluny monastery, who instructed Odo in monastic disciplines. He is praised in several documents created by Abbot Odo and is signed as Chancellor in the preamble of the diploma of Countess Adelaide. He served as the prior of Cluny in the 17th year of Louis of Overseas, according to the 100th charter under Abbot Amar. Another prior of Cluny with the same name existed in the 11th century, who later became Pope Gregory VII. In addition, John in the second book names Peter the priest, Baldwin the abbot of Monte Cassino and St. Paul's, his brother Firmus, Lord Gothefrid, and two venerable men from the same congregation, one named Archimbald, well known to John himself, and the other, unknown, called Adolescence, men of great repute, who have now become the fathers of many monks. Archimbald, the prior of the Cluny monastery, is praised in the charter of Brno, Bishop of Macon, dated the 10th year of King Rudolph. He seems to be the one who succeeded Odo in leading the Floriac monastery, as Iman writes in Book 1 of the Miracles of Saint Benedict, number 13. Weald, his successor, is mentioned by John in the third book, to be praised elsewhere by us in the Acts of Saint Odo, Abbot. Oligern can also be counted among them, rising from prior of St. Paul to Abbot of Monte Cassino, mentioned here in the year 986. Adolescence, soon mentioned by John, is undoubtedly Adasius, who was entrusted with leading the monasteries of Sarlat and Toul under the co-abbotship of Odo, as we noted earlier in Chapter 5. I believe that Bernard, the Count, with the agreement of his blessed wife and the support of his sons William, Gospert, Arnold, and Bernard, granted the monastery of St. Cerice, known as Geridia, along with all its abbey, to Adasius. This was intended for the monks wishing to live there regularly under his authority, allowing them to hold and possess both the monastery and the entire abbey without any opposition. After Abbot Adasius's death, they were to select an abbot for themselves according to the rule of Saint Benedict, ensuring the monks would be subject to the king for the safety of the place, but without any payments. Everyone involved was solemnly urged to carry out this act by all that is sacred and by the merit of the blessed Cerice, whose body rests in the aforementioned place. This charter, however, lacks chronological notes in the register of the monastery of the rule among the 9 peoples, as extracted by our Stephanosius. Among all these disciples of Odo, John also includes Adolf, Theodard, and Elisiard, a monk from the Count. Perhaps from the disciples of Brno was Aribert, about whom Odo himself shares details in Book 2 of the Life of St. Gerald, chapter 19. On one occasion, when he was traveling to Rome, he took with him a monk named Aribert, a man known for his great abstinence. There came a time when there was no meal for the abstinent man to eat with bread. The elder diligently asked if the servants had prepared his usual food. When they replied that there was nothing besides bread, he was troubled, saying, "Oh, what has happened to us today? We all have a full meal, and this servant of God will be in deprivation." However, it was a day exempt from abstinence. It was time to wash hands, and Samuel, eager to help, ran to get some water. By chance, he spotted a small fish lying on the shore, still flapping, which had leapt out of the water while he watched. Gerald gave thanks to God. As they sat at the table, the abstinent man ate part of the prepared fish, while Gerald ate the rest, sharing pieces as a blessing with everyone present. By the way, it's interesting to note that the term pulmentarium also refers to a dish made from fish. That's enough about Aribert and the praise of Odo. Now let's first hear about his life from John, and then from Nalgod.